doesn't do ships. I just couldn't believe how fitting that scene was for us this morning. There's probably, even though we can look at that and smile and laugh, there's probably a part in all of us that would rather not have to deal with the jokers in the world, those difficult people that challenge us and keep wanting to bring us down. There's probably a part of us that says they mean nothing to us. Well, I'm Leisa, for those who've not met me before, and I've been coming to North Brisbane for about 3 years now, and I'm part of the preaching team, and it's my privilege to be giving this talk today, this message, this sermon. And I'm continuing on with our Building Healthy Relationships sermon series. Last week, we heard from Marcia and Ian Watts, our special guests, on the topic of navigating blended families. And I loved what Marcia said. She said that from the minute we are conceived, we are in relationship. Relationships are actually a part of God's design for us. But unfortunately, sometimes the relationships we encounter in life are not always the healthiest. They're not always good for us. This week we're going to look at the lovely, fun topic of loving our enemies. I'm glad I got the easy week, really. Now, I think that raises an important point because relationships aren't always easy. And no matter what topic we're going to talk on in this series, we're going to come across some battles. We're going to come across things that challenge us because people challenge us. So hopefully there's some insights today. Now, if I asked you this question, do you have an enemy? Would you be able to answer that? How do we actually know that we have an enemy? How do we identify if we have an enemy? There's some rivalries going on the screen, as you can see. Some common rivalries that we encounter in the news and in culture. The dictionary says that an enemy is a person who feels hatred for, fosters harmful designs against, or engages in antagonistic activities against another. An adversary or opponent, persons that are hostile to one another. The dictionary definition also includes the enemy, the devil, Satan. So even God has an enemy. Sadly, at some point in our lives, we may encounter these people who make us feel like they are enemies. I've often thought that enemy is a very strong word. And I think that sometimes we substitute this word enemy for hard to love, or our opposer, an opposition. I thought about that word opposition and it reminded me of living in my household. Sometimes I feel like I'm living with the opposition party. I come across these challenges constantly. I feel like my kids are up against me all the time. But there are people out in the world that do this to us, and sometimes it's daily. You know, we can't go to school these days without hearing about bullying. We can't go to work without facing some people that we feel like just don't want to build us up. They don't want to encourage us. Sometimes there are just people who offend us in really massive, big ways that are life-changing. And sometimes there's just people in our lives that are these constant little annoyances. Maybe an enemy could be a jealous friend, a frenemy. That's a real thing in this world today, a frenemy. A sibling rivalry, perhaps. A power-hungry work colleague, a disapproving parent, an abusive partner, a custody battle. A road rager, that person who steals our car park, the bully who trips us over every time we walk past them at school, the oversharing Facebook friend, the likes everyone else's photos Instagrammer, the neighbour with the dog that poops on our lawn and doesn't clean it up. That's just hypothetical, not speaking from experience here. I went to the Global Leadership Summit on Friday with a group of leaders from this church, and it was an amazing day. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to stay for the second day. I would have liked to, but something was said by Bill Hybels, who is the leader of Willow Creek Church in America. He said that we live in an epidemic of disrespect. And as Christians, we do not get to choose who we respect. Respect everyone always was his message. And we hear the world say to us, hate our enemies. And we see this played out in our everyday lives with constant disrespect that goes on. But Jesus is very clear about this topic. He says, love your enemies. Love others. Love everyone always. I've struggled to do that myself. I've often asked, why would Jesus want us to love everyone, even our enemies? Shouldn't we fight back? Shouldn't we stand up and avenge what is good and what is fair and just for God, for his kingdom? Well, I think the answer is yes, we should, but not in the ways that we think. Not with hate and disrespect, with love. Jesus wants us to love our enemies because love transforms. It has the power to change things. It says in the scripture, you've heard it said, an eye for an eye. These words are from the Old Testament. They were written as a part of what we call retribution laws. And they were written specifically for those people in legal positions, the judges and the magistrates of the time. There's this Greek word that they give it. It's called Lex Talionis. I think I've pronounced it right. But whenever I say it to myself or out loud, I feel like it sounds like a Harry Potter spell. Lex Talionis. But it's this law of retaliation. That's where the words come from. And the purpose of the Lex Talionis was to release the individuals from taking matters into their own hands. Jesus is bringing this up because the people of the time were misinterpreting these laws. And he needed to set them straight. He wanted them to be released from the responsibility of taking these matters into their own hands. But they got constantly focused on the do-nots. They missed out on all the do's that were actually possible in their time. And their relationships suffered because of this focus, constantly looking at the do not murder, do not commit adultery, do not divorce, do not make false promises, do not retaliate, do not hate. Instead of looking at the positives, looking at how to nurture their relationships, how to be faithful, how to practice fidelity in marriage, how to be transparently honest when it comes to promises that we make, how to serve and how to love. And the passage that we've heard read to us this morning, thanks Greg, we're going to focus on the last two in that list, because Matthew chapter 5 actually has, chapter 5, 6 and 7 has a whole teaching on focusing on the do's here that Jesus was trying to bring to his time when he was on earth. But part of that whole sermon that Jesus delivered, we're going to just focus on these last two today. And I wanted to share with you a story because the Bible is full of stories where God's people choose love instead of being consumed by their situation and their hatred. There's a boy called Joseph, or a man called Joseph. His story is in Genesis. He was really hated by his brothers. They were so jealous of him. They hated Joseph so much that they sold him into slavery. And years later, Joseph had the chance to come up against them and destroy them. He could have taken matters into his own hands, but he made a choice. He chose not to be their judge, but to be their brother. He chose love. Choosing to love someone when they're hurling insults at us and making life difficult. Choosing love in those situations, it changes our position. So we can either let them bring us down, we can let them make us feel like victims, or we can choose to rise above. We can choose to be a bigger person. Just because people treat us like jerks doesn't mean we have to be jerks to them. Love has this power to transform how we feel, and it has a power to transform a situation. Another reason that Jesus wants us to choose love is because love brings freedom. Love has this power to overcome. We heard this verse read to us. Love your enemies. You've heard it said, love your neighbour and hate your enemies, but I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Hate, hurt, as George shared with us earlier, suffering, all those things can suffocate us. They can chain us. They can cripple us. Fear cripples us. Injustice can make us want to fight and retaliate. You know, I tried to think of, I did some research and I was looking for a story to share here on this, and I thought, I just really need to share a freedom story. And I went looking for a freedom story online. The internet's a wonderful thing. Then I stopped and I thought for a minute, I have a freedom story. And it's been difficult for me to make the choice to share this story with you all, but I think I need to today. 3 years ago, my husband left me for another woman. Up until that point in my life, if you'd asked me who my enemy was, I would have struggled to think of anyone. But their choices, their behaviours broke me. I had never in my life experienced such deep hurt and pain. I felt betrayed. I felt worthless. I felt humiliated. I hated feeling that way. I hated what they had done. I hated them for it. I even hated myself. Sounds crazy, but I hated myself for letting it happen. I know that I had no control, but I remember just feeling that hate because I didn't want to let go of the idea that I had control of something. But I had to. This constant feeling of hate was just growing in me. Hate became all-consuming. I wasn't just fighting a battle against my estranged husband and his new partner. I was fighting a battle against hate. My body felt in the brokenness, this hate, a very real feeling, and my spirit was fighting against that. I was fighting to stay in the light. Then I remember probably about 6 months after this event, my girlfriend, who I hadn't seen for a long time, haven't even spoken to for a long time, she knew about what had happened, but we hadn't really spoken. And she rang me one day and she said, I'm going through something, I know you're going through something, let's both get away. So we went over to New Zealand and we did a South Island road trip. Best medicine ever. Just getting away, just being in another place, being in the most beautiful creation that I would describe that I've ever seen, and the open road before us. We just got in the van and we just drove, and there were long times of silence, but there were also these really key moments of conversation. And I remember sharing with her a little bit about what I was going through, what I was feeling, and how I was having this inner battle with hate, and I didn't like that. I didn't like that I was going through that. And she said to me something really profound. She probably doesn't even remember saying it, but she said, "It sounds as if your wings are still clipped. It sounds as if you've let this failed marriage clip your wings and you're struggling to fly." It put in my mind this image of an open door on a cage, and this bird I was picturing sitting there at the door, not knowing if they could take that step, would spread their wings and fly. But I came home from that trip and I had this constant image on my mind, and with that in my mind, I felt like my heart was starting to heal. I felt like I had new hope. I felt that I was capable of overcoming what I was going through. And I really wanted to fly. I wanted to feel the wind in my wings. Piece by piece, God's love for me was gluing my heart back together. And I started to learn how to love again. I think the first big lesson for me in all of that was believing that God cared for me and accepting that God cares also for them as much as he does for me. Verse 45 says, "He causes the sun to rise on the evil and the good. He sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous." We're not slaves to the choices of others. We are equals with our enemies. And this means that the chains that bind us don't define us anymore. This means that the fear that cripples us doesn't stop us anymore. And it means the fight that stirs within us doesn't consume us anymore. Choosing to love our enemies gives us an alternative way to live, unfettered and free. Another reason that Jesus wants us to choose love is because love creates hope. There's a power in hope that gives us the opportunity for things to be better, that our situation can be better, that we can even be better. And hope also believes that others can be better. Even if we have no control over that, we can still hope for it. Verse 48 says, "Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect." Many of us would hope for a perfect world with perfect people, but some of us are just waiting around for God to do something, or maybe for Jesus to come again. But I believe that we can have a part to play in helping this world find that perfection if we all hope for love. The ultimate ideal world on earth as it is in heaven. The kingdom of God, it's just one step-by-step process of each of us growing to be more like Jesus, choosing to love. Jesus is the ultimate example of how to love. Peter writes, people insulted Christ, but he did not insult them in return. Christ suffered, but he did not threaten. He let God, the one who judges rightly, take care of him. Christ carried our sins in his body on the cross so we would stop living for sin and we'd start living for what is right. And we are healed because of his wounds. Jesus is teaching his disciples that there is just one thing they need to do to be like him, and that is love. I give you a new commandment, Jesus says, that you love one another just as I have loved you. You also should love one another. By this, everyone will know that you're my disciples if you have love for one another. Love promotes growth and development and creates opportunities for our situation to be better. Love hopes for better. There's a number of stories out there that I could use to illustrate this topic. Stories of people who have gone through tragic situations because of other people, other people's choices. But then they go on to make a difference. They hope for a better place to live. Just the other day I heard someone say that my greatest contribution may not be something that I do, but who I raise. And I actually I make a choice when I interact with my ex-husband and his partner I choose to be kind. And I choose that because I hope that my children will learn that from me. It is my hope that the kids that I raise in this world will be raised with hope. They will learn how to love, and they will not learn this culture of disrespect and hate. I want them to hope for a better idea of marriage that I have modelled than what I have modelled. I want them to hope for a better idea of family than what they've experienced. I hope they will grow up knowing how to love rather than how to hate. And we're constantly facing situations and people that challenge us. It's a daily thing. Things come up every day that challenge us in this thinking. Every time that we do choose love in those situations, we are helping to create a better world to live in. Jesus wants us to love our enemies. And that's all very good and well. And I could stand here all day and talk about the reasons why Jesus wants this. When the rubber hits the road, we ask ourselves, how? In my situation, how can I do this? And he gives us some good examples in this passage. He says, turn the other cheek. Now, I've often looked at this verse and I've I think, misinterpreted, thinking that we need to be weak and just stand there and cop it, whatever is thrown at us. But I think I need to be clear on this, that we are not anyone's punching bag. We need to protect ourselves. But we will be in situations where people will slap us on the face, insult us publicly in front of others, and try and cut us down. This is what Jesus is talking about here. He's not talking about the domestic violence situation of the day. He's not talking about any of that. Even though that is very real for people, this is not specifically talking about being someone's punching bag and letting people just smack us around. That is not the message here. This is about standing in those moments with dignity and grace. And when you are slapped in the face, metaphorically, if you can stand and turn the other cheek, you stand with dignity, you stand with honour, and you stand with respect. Another example is giving generously. It says there that we should give more than they ask. So if we're being sued by someone, if we come up against people who want more than what's owed, whether rightfully or not, we need to give more than what they're asking for. In doing that, we demonstrate grace, we demonstrate mercy, we demonstrate generosity, we demonstrate love. Jesus says we need to go the extra mile. If someone says to her, if we're expected to go 1 mile and then they say to us, no, if they tell us to go a mile, then we should go 2. This is what Jesus is saying here. So this is actually talking about power struggles, okay? People in our lives expecting us to do more than what we should, more than what we're paid to do, or more than what's expected of us that is fair. And in those situations, we need to do twice as much. It's your choice if you choose that. And when you make that choice, it changes what you're able to accomplish, because you have then a positive mindset, not a victimized one. If you choose to go the extra mile, becomes your choice, comes about your choice, not about what they've asked you to do. This is also an opportunity for personal growth. I want to just say that we need to just be aware of ourselves, keep our wits about us in these situations, in these power struggles. Don't exhaust ourselves in the process, but really try our best. Put our best foot forward. And Jesus says, don't expect anything in return. When someone takes advantage of us, when they want to beg, borrow, and steal from us, maybe they want to manipulate us into doing something that we know we shouldn't do, we need to be wise. We need to be generous. People sometimes catch us off guard and manipulate us into making decisions, but we can learn from those situations so that we don't find ourselves in the same situations over and over again. And when we do find ourselves in that situation, then it's better to just give. It's better to be generous, remembering that God will reward a generous giver. He will reward his children, and he will provide everything that we need. We also need to pray. It says, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. And I want to say that it took me time, it took me a process to get to a point where I could choose love and I could choose kindness towards my enemies. But in that process, all I could do was pray. There wasn't anything else that I had to give. So in those moments, I want to encourage you to pray. Jesus encourages us to pray. The very least, we can find it in it. If we can't find it in us to love yet, we can pray. So in conclusion, I just want to say that God teaches his children to love no matter what. No matter what age we are. As children, we're still working this out. We still need his help and his guidance. We'll fail at times, but our Father in heaven is patient and he will be there to help us try again and again. So if we're ever going to achieve hope, freedom and transformation in this life, then we need to choose love. I'll be the first to admit that choosing love has probably been the hardest thing to do. In my moments of anger and bitterness, I want to throw it all out the window. And I've tried endless excuses to justify not loving my enemies. But when I do that, no one wins. No one wins. See, I have to believe that God's love has already won against the enemy. I have to believe that love will win against our enemies. And I have to believe that I am capable of loving my enemies. We don't get to choose who to love. Jesus makes it clear, love everyone, always. But we do need to believe that we're capable of it. So I'm going to invite the team to come. We have now a time of reflection and prayer. And a very special person, Amelia Oakley, is going to come and share some words. I want us to just take this time to consider what God has brought up for us this morning. Maybe there's been thoughts on your mind about people that have been difficult to love in your life, in the present, in the past. Maybe you're thinking about those moments when you've been challenged to choose love. But I want you to know that as you sit here, as you hear the words that Amelia has prepared, she's going to share from her heart, as we sing together and declare that we are no longer slaves to fear, that we have been delivered from our enemies, I want you all to know, every single one of us to know, I believe you are capable of choosing love. So if you're struggling with that this morning, if you're struggling to believe that for yourself, then I'm going to be here at the front and I want to welcome you and invite you to come and pray with me. Thanks, Amelia.
Remember who the real enemy is. For he lurks in the shadows and is not of flesh and blood, but of malice and deception. Those whom are ignorant of God are fearful of what is yet to come. Your enemies don't understand you. Or perhaps you don't understand your enemies. Remember who the real enemy is. Take away the blindfold that hides what is really happening. Don't you remember? Love your neighbors and hate your enemy. But I say, love your neighbor and your enemy. For who can truly love their enemy when blinded and robbed from by the devil? Love, compassion, hope, grow into these habits, banish the devil. Love your enemies with a passion, for this passion will blaze on. And always remember who the real enemy is.